This PowerPoint presentation is about using description and figurative language in your writing. When we use description and figurative language, our writing tends to be more interesting and more dynamic as we do that. So the first thing we want to talk about is description. You're probably very familiar with description. Description is creating an image in the mind of the reader through our words, which is a difficult thing to do, but definitely adds a lot of interest to things. You can probably think about something that you've read that had a lot of description that was very enjoyable to read. So we want to try and integrate these ideas into our own writing. As we're thinking about description, we want to think about three different categories or three different types of description. Objective description, subjective description, and figurative description. Keeping these things in mind can help you add some variety to your language and to make your writing very dynamic. The first type of description we can think about is objective description. An objective description is when we kind of look at things like we're a robot, like we're a machine. We're describing just what we see, just what we hear, just what we touch, just what we smell, just what we taste. We're trying to be as objective as possible. These are things like what color is something, what size is something, what shape is something, where is it, how is it laid out, etc. So if we have one object and two different people are describing it using only objective description, their description should sound very similar. There shouldn't be a lot of difference in our objective descriptions. That's one way we can describe something. In addition to that, we have subjective description. And subjective description focuses more on the describer's personal opinions and associations with what they're describing. So they might contain things like what does it remind them of, how does it make them feel, what do they associate it with, etc. So if two different people are describing the same thing using subjective description, it might be really different what they come up with. When the same object might make one person feel sad and one person feel happy. That's okay. That's a different type of description that we use to make something visible for a reader. The third main category of description is figurative description. And figurative description really uses comparisons to describe things. Often they use things that the audience should be familiar with to make something that they're unfamiliar with very clear. So this is going to describe what something is like, what it's similar to, what it resembles, etc. Figurative description is obviously going to be unique to the describer, and it really only works well if what you're comparing something to is going to be very obvious to your readers. It's got to be clear to them what you're talking about. So just to kind of demonstrate the differences between the three, we have Van Gogh's painting, Starry Night. We could use all three different types of descriptions to do that. So some examples of objective description. There's a black tower on the left-hand side. There's some dark blue and black hills in the background. In the bottom right, there's some yellow circles in the top half of the painting as stars, and a large yellow crescent moon in the top right corner. Those are all objective. You and I see those same things when we look at it. When we start to describe the objects from subjective description, we want to talk about our feelings, our associations. So when I look at this painting, I find it very calming and peaceful. I find the dark colors very soothing. The swirls in the sky give it almost a cheerfulness, a pleasantness. You or someone else may describe this from a subjective descriptive perspective and find that it's gloomy, or that it's ominous, or that it's eerie, or that it's scary. And those things are going to differ. Another way I could use to describe these things are to use figurative language to make comparisons. So I could say the tower on the left is like an upside-down icicle. Crescent moon is a Cheshire cat smiling in the sky. Those are comparisons. I'm assuming you know what an icicle looks like, what an upside-down icicle will look like. I'm assuming what you know what a Cheshire cat smile looks like, that kind of big grin. And those things might help make that description more clear for a reader. Obviously, as you can see or hear, no one description is going to give a full picture. We have to kind of use all three in our writing to give a full picture of something. So just something I want you to be thinking about as you're writing your own narrative is to be intentional about how and when you use each type of description so you can maximize its effect. If you're trying to set a scene, from your perspective, subjective description might be really important. If you want to be more objective, you might want to bring that in as you're doing that. So I want to do a little bit more of a focus on figurative language too. Something you hopefully have heard before, but definitely something that can add a lot of spice and variety to our writing. So as we think about figurative language, we can define an image as a word or a sequence of words that refers to any sensory experience. Of course, our senses, 5 senses, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. So when we're trying to describe those things in words, we call that an image. Figurative language is going to focus on using comparisons to provide that kind of sensory experience. 3 main types of figurative language that we're going to talk about today: metaphor, simile, personification. There are many others, but these are going to be the 3 main ones that you'll see most often. A simile is a type of metaphor, but it makes an explicit comparison using words like or as. So usually those are really easy to spot. X is like Y, and then you're trying to compare X to Y to illustrate something in an interesting way. It's not actually like Y. So if we have the example, the team's center looked like a skyscraper, I'm trying to think of what kind of things am I trying to say about that basketball player by comparing him to a skyscraper. He's tall, he's thin, towers over other people, something like that. My love is like a red, red rose. It's a very famous poem. We can think about what is the love like that the rose is being compared to. Maybe it's beautiful, it's in full bloom, it's valued, it's velvety, all those sort of things. So always have a purpose for your comparison. A metaphor is very similar to a simile, but a metaphor is a little bit more sophisticated because we take out those words like or as. Say something is like something else. In a metaphor, a poet would write, X is Y. It's absolutely not literal. X is not Y. You want to think about that. So if we say, my brother's a prince, for example, what kind of qualities of a prince might I be trying to put onto my brother, who's not a prince, in a literal sense? Maybe he's spoiled, maybe he's bossy, maybe he is very handsome. All those things maybe are things we associate with princes. Razorback Stadium was a slaughterhouse. Razorback Stadium, of course, is a football stadium. It's a slaughterhouse, not literally. What are we trying to say through that metaphor? Maybe it was they beat the other team by a good bit, so they were really defeated. Something like that. So again, always want to make sure that that comparison is clear. An implied metaphor is a metaphor that lacks the to be verb. So we think of to be as a verb, all those conjugations are things like is, am, are, was, were, will be, etc. So an implied metaphor would say something like, my love has petals and sharp thorns. Of course, by saying that, I'm implying that it's a rose. So a little bit more sophisticated, perhaps, than a regular metaphor. I like this one a lot. The subway coursed through the arteries of the city. So by saying that, what kind of things am I implying about the subway? What am I trying to say? Can think that through. What courses through arteries of a body? Blood. Blood is the life force of the body, so the subway is sort of the life force of the city. It's a neat sort of metaphor. A dead metaphor is one that's been used so many times that it's boring. It's not interesting anymore. It's a cliche. Some common ones. He hit the nail on the head. She was cool as a cucumber. His PowerPoint shows crystal clear. Try and avoid those in your own writing. It's something that kind of comes to your brain because you've heard it so many times. It's not interesting anymore. Try and find something else. Personification is our last main type of figurative language we want to think about. In personification, animals, elements of nature, abstract ideas are given human qualities. We personify, we make them more like people. Some famous ones from literature, John Milton calls time the subtle thief of youth. Of course, time isn't a thief, doesn't steal anything, right? That's a nice image. Homer refers to the rosy fingers of dawn. Dawn, of course, doesn't actually have fingers, but it pulls up a really nice image in your head, I think. The stars smile down on us. That's another way to think about it. The angry wind slashed its way across the island. These are all different ways that we can personify things, but give us a really good picture of what that wind was like without needing to see it or hear it ourselves. The Bull Enlightened Fiction Contest is a really interesting contest where people write the best worst line they can think of to a hypothetical novel. So Buller Lytton was a Victorian writer who came up with the original worst first line, and it was a dark and stormy night, which we've probably heard in a lot of different movies or cartoons. This original one, dark and stormy night, the rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets, for it is in London that our scene lies, rattling along the housetops, fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness. The original worst first line is really wordy, a lot of different figurative language in there that kind of makes it a mess, hard to get through, although it's sort of amusing, I think. We can see a lot of personification in there. The wind rattles along the housetops. It agitates the scanty flame. The flame is struggling against the darkness. These are all different ones. So I have a couple of other examples of the Bull Enlightened Fiction Contest. These are people who have won. It's an actual contest. You can enter if you like. But you can see if you can find any simile, metaphor, personification in these examples. They had but one last remaining night together, so they embraced each other as tightly as that two-flavored, entwined string cheese that is orange and yellowish white, the orange probably being a bland cheddar and the white mozzarella, although it could possibly be provolone or just plain American, as it really doesn't taste distinctly dissimilar from the orange, yet they would have you believe it does by coloring it differently. Sort of an amusing one. There's a big simile in there. Can you find it? It's right here. They embrace each other as tightly as the two-flavored string cheese. And then it goes into more detail from there. Another one. She resolved to end the love affair with Ramon tonight, summarily, like Martha Stewart ripping the sand vein out of a shrimp's tail. Though the term love affair now struck her as a ridiculous euphemism, not unlike sand vein, which is, after all, an intestine, not a vein, and that tarry substance inside certainly isn't sand. That brought her back to Ramon. There's another really big simile in there. I don't know if you could find it. She resolved to end the love affair, like Martha Stewart ripping the sand vein out of a shrimp's tail. And one last one. This is one of my favorites. Theirs was a New York love, a checkered taxi ride, burning rubber, and like the city, their passion was open 24/7. Steam rising from their bodies like slick streets, exhaling warm, moist, white breath through a manhole covers stamped "Forged by Delaney Brothers, Sataway, New Jersey." There's a big metaphor at the beginning. Can you find it? Theirs was a New York love, a checkered taxi ride, burning rubber. Love, comparing love to taxi ride. Like the city is a simile. Like slick streets. That's another good simile. White breath through manhole covers, some personification. Some could see a couple examples in there. So, in conclusion, just to make your narrative writing more interesting, try and use some of these different types of description. Try and integrate some figurative language into your writing, and you should have a nice, dynamic, interesting narrative.